The lecture hall buzzed with anticipation as over 300 Xenobiology students from across the Galactic Confederation settled into their seats. Professor Kethvar, a distinguished Xenthari academic whose crystalline exoskeleton gleamed under the artificial lights, adjusted his translation device and surveyed the diverse crowd. Representatives from 47 different species had gathered for this advanced seminar on dangerous xenological encounters. Welcome to Advanced Xenobiology, Fatal Encounters with Unknown Species, Kethvar announced, his voice carrying through the hall's acoustic enhancers. Today's lesson will focus on a critical principle that has saved countless lives across our Confederation. Never, under any circumstances, handle unknown species without proper containment protocols. A ripple of agreement passed through the audience. The Vorthan students nodded their elongated heads, while the insectoid Klaxi clicked their mandibles in acknowledgement. Everyone knew the stories of expeditions gone wrong, of first contacts that had ended in tragedy. I will present 3 case studies that demonstrate why this principle exists, Kethvar continued, activating the holographic display behind him. Each involves a different type of threat: biological, chemical, and psychic contamination. The first hologram materialized, showing a lush jungle planet with unusual purple vegetation. Our first case involves the exploration of Kepler 442c, investigated by a joint Xenthar-Vorthan expedition 15 cycles ago. The planet appeared perfect for colonization: oxygen-rich atmosphere, abundant water, and remarkably Earth-like gravity. The audience leaned forward as the display showed expedition members in full environmental suits moving through the alien forest. The team maintained perfect protocol for the first 7 days. All specimens were collected using remote tools, stored in secure containment units, and analyzed within sealed laboratories aboard their ship. A new image appeared, showing a small, seemingly harmless creature that resembled a cross between a rabbit and a butterfly, with iridescent fur and delicate gossamer wings. On day 8, they encountered this species, which they designated as Lepus papilio. The creature appeared docile, even friendly. It approached the team without fear, making soft, melodic sounds that their translators interpreted as potential communication attempts. Kethvar paused, allowing the weight of anticipation to build. Junior xenobiologist Trendal made a decision that would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. Moved by what he perceived as the creature's intelligence and gentleness, he removed his gloves to offer it food directly. The hologram shifted to show medical scans, cellular analysis, and quarantine footage. Within 6 hours, Trendal was dead. The creature's fur contained microscopic organisms that could penetrate Xenthari skin and rapidly multiply within the bloodstream. These organisms released toxins that caused complete organ failure. A collective shudder ran through the audience. Several students took notes frantically as Kethvar continued. But Trendal's death was only the beginning. The organisms had contaminated his environmental suit, and despite decontamination protocols, they spread to 3 other team members before proper quarantine could be established. The expedition was forced to abandon their mission, and Kepler 442c was classified as a Class 5 biohazard world, forbidden to all Confederation species. The second hologram appeared, displaying a crystalline world where geometric formations jutted from the surface like frozen lightning. Our second case involves the mineral-rich world of Xerion Prime. The Klaxi Geological Survey detected unusual energy signatures emanating from crystalline formations. Initial scans showed no signs of biological life, leading the team to believe the world was safe for direct exploration. The display showed Klaxi miners in their characteristic powered exoskeletons, their natural shells providing additional protection against the harsh environment. The team's mineralogist, Zekthar, discovered formations unlike anything in Confederation databases. The crystals seemed to pulse with internal light and generated harmonious resonances when struck. Kethvar manipulated the hologram to show a detailed molecular analysis. Zekthar became fascinated by these crystals and spent hours studying them. Against protocol, he removed a small sample from a formation and held it directly in his manipulator claw, believing his natural Klaxi shell would protect him from any potential contamination. The image shifted to show disturbing footage of a Klaxi exhibiting erratic behavior, moving in jerky, uncontrolled motions. The crystal fragment wasn't biological, but it contained complex nanoscale structures that interfaced with nervous systems. Within hours, Zekthar lost control of his voluntary motor functions. The nanoscale structures had begun rewriting his neural pathways, attempting to integrate his consciousness into some kind of collective network. Several students gasped audibly. The concept of technological infection was particularly terrifying to most species, as their natural immunities provided no protection against such threats. Zekthar's condition deteriorated rapidly. He began speaking in mathematical languages that no Confederation computer could decipher, and his behavior became increasingly inhuman. The other team members were forced to place him in cryogenic suspension and abort their mission. Zirian Prime was subsequently classified as a Class 6 technological hazard zone. The third hologram materialized, showing a world shrouded in perpetual twilight, with strange aurora-like phenomena dancing across its atmosphere. Our final case study involves the most insidious threat of all: psychic contamination. The research vessel Consciousness Seeker, crewed by Vorthan telepaths, detected unusual mental emanations from the world designated as Psi Delta 7. The display showed the elegant, elongated forms of Vorthan researchers, their natural telepathic abilities making them ideally suited for investigating psychic phenomena. The Vorthan team detected what they believed to be signs of a vast, ancient intelligence residing within the planet's electromagnetic field. Dr. Velmar, the expedition's lead psychic researcher, became convinced that this intelligence was attempting to communicate. Kethvar's voice took on a more somber tone. Dr. Velmar decided to establish direct mental contact with the phenomenon, despite protocols requiring the use of buffered telepathic interfaces. He believed his natural Vorthan mental shields would protect him from any harmful influences. The hologram showed brain scans and psychic energy readings, the data patterns becoming increasingly chaotic over time. The moment Dr. Velmar made direct contact, the entity began infiltrating his consciousness. Unlike the previous cases, this contamination was purely mental, making it almost impossible to detect until it was too late. The audience watched in horrified fascination as the display showed Dr. Velmar's gradual transformation, his behavioral patterns becoming increasingly alien. Within days, Dr. Velmar was no longer entirely himself. The entity had begun using him as a conduit to influence the other crew members. 3 more Vorthans fell under his control before the ship's AI initiated emergency isolation protocols. Kethvar turned to face his students directly. The surviving crew members reported that their colleagues had become something else entirely, still recognizably Vorthan in appearance, but with minds that belonged to an intelligence that viewed organic life as raw material for its expansion. Psi Delta 7 was classified as a Class 7 psychic hazard, and the entire system was placed under permanent quarantine. A young Zen-3 student raised her crystalline appendage. "Professor, were there any survivors from these expeditions who recovered from their contamination?" Kethvar's expression grew grave. Trendal and his infected colleagues died within hours. Zekthar remains in cryogenic suspension. Our best technicians believe that awakening him would only accelerate the nanoscale integration process. As for Dr. Velmar and the infected Vorthans, they are contained in a specialized facility where Confederation psychic specialists study them in hopes of developing countermeasures. Another student, this one a Klaxi, clicked nervously before asking, "What makes these cases so significant? Surely we've learned from these mistakes." "That brings me to today's most important point," Kethvar replied, manipulating the holographic display to show current Confederation protocols. These three cases, among dozens of others, led to the establishment of our current xenobiological safety standards. Every species in the Confederation has accepted these protocols because we understand that the universe contains threats we cannot anticipate. The hologram shifted to show the standard containment equipment used by modern exploration teams: force field generators, remote manipulation arms, sealed analysis chambers, and emergency quarantine systems. No specimen, no matter how harmless it appears, should ever be handled directly. No material should be analyzed outside of proper containment. No psychic contact should be attempted without appropriate buffers and safeguards. A Vorthin student raised a tentacle-like appendage. "Professor, has any species ever demonstrated natural immunity to these types of threats?" Kethvar considered the question carefully. An interesting inquiry. Most species have some natural resistances. Xanthary crystalline exoskeletons provide excellent protection against biological contamination. Klaxi shells resist most chemical threats, and Vorthin mental shields offer some psychic protection. However, these defenses are never absolute, as our case studies demonstrate. He paused thoughtfully before continuing. There are legends and unconfirmed reports of species with broader immunities, but these remain largely theoretical. The Galactic Confederation has encountered no species that can safely ignore xenobiological protocols. The lecture continued with detailed analysis of containment procedures, emergency protocols, and the technological safeguards that have been developed in response to these disasters. Students asked questions about decontamination procedures, quarantine protocols, and the ethical implications of studying dangerous xenological specimens. As the session drew toward its conclusion, Kethvar emphasized the critical importance of maintaining vigilance even during routine missions. The universe is vast and filled with wonders that challenge our understanding of life itself. However, our survival depends on respecting the unknown and maintaining proper safety protocols at all times. A notification chimed on Kethvar's personal display, indicating that he had received a priority message from the Confederation Science Council. He glanced at it briefly, noting that it concerned a newly discovered species, before returning his attention to the class. "For your assignment this cycle, I want each of you to design a comprehensive safety protocol for a hypothetical first contact scenario. Consider biological, chemical, technological, and psychic threats, and develop procedures that could protect a survey team while still allowing for meaningful scientific study." As students began gathering their materials and discussing the assignment, Kethvar opened the priority message. His crystalline features shifted color slightly as he read the contents, a common Xanthary expression of surprise and confusion. The message contained preliminary reports from a human exploration vessel that had encountered unknown species on a recently discovered world. According to the report, the human crew had not only made direct contact with multiple unidentified life forms, but had somehow managed to survive the experience without any apparent ill effects. Even more puzzling, the humans seemed to have established some form of ongoing relationship with these alien species, despite having no knowledge of proper xenobiological protocols. The initial data suggested that the humans were not only unharmed, but were actively caring for specimens that should have been lethal to any known form of life. Kethvar read through the report twice, certain he must be misunderstanding something. According to Confederation records, humans were a recently emerged species with minimal experience in xenobiological encounters. They possessed no natural defenses comparable to Xanthary exoskeletons, Klaxi shells, or Vorthin psychic shields. By all logic, direct contact with unknown alien species should have resulted in the same tragic outcomes that have befallen so many Confederation expeditions. Yet the preliminary reports suggested otherwise. The human vessel, designation Lucky Explorer, had apparently made contact with at least 3 different alien species during their survey of the world they had designated as New Eden. Rather than following standard containment protocols, the humans had engaged in direct physical contact with these beings, and had even brought them aboard their vessel. The most concerning aspect of the report was that the humans seemed to be thriving. Medical scans showed no signs of contamination, infection, or psychic manipulation. If anything, the crew appeared to be in excellent health and high spirits. Kethvar closed the message and looked out at his departing students. If the reports were accurate, everything he had just taught them about xenobiological safety might need to be reconsidered. The implications were staggering. Either humans possessed some unknown form of universal immunity, or they were incredibly fortunate, or the galaxy contained far more benign life forms than previously believed. As the lecture hall emptied, Kethvar began preparing for what he suspected would be one of the most important investigations of his career. The Confederation Science Council would undoubtedly want a full analysis of the human encounter, and as one of the galaxy's leading experts in dangerous xenological encounters, he would likely be called upon to lead the investigation. The irony was not lost on him that after spending his career studying the tragic consequences of ignoring safety protocols, he might now need to examine a case where such protocols have been completely disregarded with apparently positive results. Little did Professor Kethvar know that his carefully constructed understanding of xenobiological safety was about to encounter the most confounding challenge of his academic career: the inexplicable ability of humans to befriend literally anything. 3 days after Professor Kethvar's lecture, the Confederation Science Council convened an emergency session aboard the research station Deep Thought, orbiting the gas giant Prometheus 7. The circular chamber buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from 12 different species gathered to discuss the human situation. Admiral Exandra, a towering Vorthan with silvery skin and, for graceful arms, presided over the meeting. Her telepathic abilities allowed her to monitor the emotional states of all attendees, and she could sense the mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and concern that filled the chamber. "We have received additional reports from the human vessel Lucky Explorer," Admiral Exandra announced, her melodious voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. The situation has become even more unprecedented. Professor Kethvar adjusted his position at the hexagonal conference table, his crystalline exoskeleton reflecting the soft blue lighting of the chamber. Beside him sat Dr. HFY Sci-Fi, a renowned Galaxy microbiologist whose metallic carapace was covered in the ritual scarring that denoted her expertise level. The latest transmission from Captain Sarah Chun includes detailed biological scans of the 3 species the humans have encountered, Dr. HFY Sci-Fi reported, manipulating the holographic display with her segmented appendages. The data defies everything we know about interspecies contamination protocols. The hologram materialized in the center of the chamber, showing 3 distinct alien life forms. The first appeared to be a small, crystalline entity with numerous faceted surfaces that refracted light in hypnotic patterns. The second resembled a living shadow with tendrils of dark energy that seemed to absorb photons. The third was perhaps the most disturbing, a creature that appeared to shift between different states of matter, sometimes solid, sometimes gaseous, sometimes something that didn't fit into any known category of physics. According to the humans' own descriptions, Professor Kethvar said, studying the data with growing bewilderment, they have designated these species with what they call pet names. The crystalline being they call Sparkles, the shadow entity is Smoky, and the phase-shifting creature is Blob. A ripple of concerned chittering emerged from the Galaxy representatives, while the Zenthari delegates shifted colors and patterns that indicated deep unease. The casual nature of the human naming convention suggested a level of familiarity that should have been impossible given the apparent danger these creatures represented. The crystalline entity shows energy signatures consistent with the nanoscale technological contamination we observed on Xerion Prime, Dr. HFY Sci-Fi continued, highlighting specific data points in the hologram. Contact with such an entity should have resulted in neural integration and loss of individual consciousness within hours. Admiral Alexander's primary appendages gestured elegantly as she spoke. The shadow creature exhibits psychic emanations that register as Class 8 on our threat assessment scale. Direct contact with such a being should have resulted in immediate mental domination or consciousness absorption. And the phase-shifting entity, Professor Kethvar added grimly, appears to be composed of exotic matter that exists partially outside normal space-time. Physical contact should have resulted in severe dimensional displacement or molecular disintegration. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. These weren't merely dangerous creatures. They represented the kinds of threats that had led to the complete abandonment of entire star systems. Yet the humans were apparently living alongside them without any protective equipment whatsoever. Dr. Velteris, an elderly Zenthri xenopsychologist, spoke up from across the chamber. Perhaps the humans possess some form of natural immunity we haven't encountered before. Their species file indicates they evolved on a world with remarkably diverse and dangerous flora and fauna. I've studied their biological specifications extensively, Dr. HFY Sci-Fi replied, calling up human anatomical data. Humans possess no crystalline exoskeleton, no natural electromagnetic shielding, and no innate psychic defenses. By all conventional metrics, they should be among the most vulnerable species in the galaxy to xenobiological threats. Admiral Zoe Alexandra's telepathic abilities allowed her to sense the rising tension in the chamber. There is another possibility we must consider, she said carefully. Perhaps these particular alien species are not as dangerous as our preliminary assessment suggests. Professor Kethvar's exoskeleton shifted to a deep amber hue, a Zenthri expression of strong disagreement. Admiral, with respect, the energy signatures are unmistakable. The crystalline entity's nanoscale structures are identical to those that killed Survey Team Delta 7 on Zirion Prime. The psychic emanations from the shadow creature match the patterns we observed during the Psi Delta 7 incident. Then, how do you explain the human survival? Demanded Dr. Korthmix, a squat, heavily armored Duralian whose species was known for their pragmatic approach to problem-solving. The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Every being in the chamber understood the implications of what they were discussing. If humans could safely interact with species that were lethal to other Confederation races, it would fundamentally alter the balance of power in galactic exploration and colonization efforts. We need more data, Admiral Zuaxender decided. I'm authorizing a direct investigation mission. Professor Kethvar, I want you to lead a small team to observe the human vessel and document their interaction protocols. Professor Kethvar's color shifted to a surprised blue-green. Admiral, approaching that close to confirmed Class 6 and Class 8 threat entities violates every safety protocol in the Confederation manual. Which is exactly why you're the perfect choice, Admiral Zuaxender replied. You know the protocols better than anyone, and you'll be able to identify exactly what the humans are doing differently. We'll provide you with the most advanced containment ship in the fleet and full authorization for emergency retreat if the situation becomes untenable. Dr. HFY Sci-Fi clicked her mandibles in what the translator interpreted as nervous laughter. Assuming we survive long enough to retreat, the phase-shifting entity alone could potentially breach any containment field we possess. The humans have been in contact with these entities for over 2 weeks, Admiral Alexander pointed out. If they intended immediate harm, surely it would have manifested by now. As the meeting continued, Professor Kethvar found himself reviewing everything he knew about human behavior patterns. The species had only achieved faster-than-light travel within the last 50 standard years, making them relative newcomers to galactic civilization. Their homeworld, designated as Earth in their language, was notable for its biological diversity and the presence of numerous species that would be considered dangerous by most galactic standards. Humans had evolved as omnivorous pack hunters with remarkable adaptability and social cooperation. They demonstrated unusual emotional bonds with other species, often forming attachments to creatures that served no obvious survival purpose. This behavior, which they called keeping pets, was considered somewhat unusual but not unprecedented among spacefaring species. However, the idea that humans might extend this behavior to potentially lethal alien entities was deeply concerning. Either they possessed instinctive knowledge that allowed them to identify truly dangerous creatures, or their emotional bonding mechanisms were so powerful that they could somehow neutralize threats through pure social interaction. Professor, Admiral Alexandra addressed him directly. I understand your concerns about this mission. However, we need to understand what's happening here. If humans have discovered some method of safely interacting with dangerous xenological entities, the Confederation needs to know about it. And if they're simply extraordinarily lucky and their luck is about to run out, Professor Kethvar asked, then we'll be there to provide emergency assistance and document the incident for future safety protocols. Admiral Alexandra replied grimly. The meeting continued for several more hours as they planned the observation mission. The team would consist of Professor Kethvar, Dr. Sislek, and a small crew of specialists aboard the science vessel Careful Observer, a ship equipped with the most advanced sensor arrays and containment systems the Confederation possessed. Their mission parameters were carefully defined. Maintain a safe distance from the human vessel, observe all interactions with the alien entities, and document any evidence of contamination or threat manifestation. Under no circumstances were they to make direct contact with either the humans or the alien species unless specifically invited to do so. As the meeting concluded, Professor Kethvar couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to witness something that would fundamentally challenge their understanding of xenobiological safety. The protocols he had spent his career developing and teaching were based on thousands of documented encounters with hostile alien life forms. Yet here were humans, apparently fragile, defenseless humans, successfully interacting with creatures that should have killed them within hours of first contact. Either his entire professional understanding was flawed, or humans possessed some unknown advantage that made them uniquely suited for such interactions. 3 days later, Professor Kethvar found himself aboard the Careful Observer as it approached the coordinates where the human vessel had last been detected. The ship's advanced sensors had been recalibrated to detect the specific energy signatures associated with the 3 alien entities the humans had encountered. Contact established, reported Lieutenant Vexnull, the ship's Vorthan communications officer. Human vessel Lucky Explorer is responding to our diplomatic approach request. The main view screen activated, revealing the interior of what appeared to be a remarkably casual human bridge. Captain Sarah Chun, a woman with short brown hair and an expression of friendly curiosity, smiled directly at the camera. "Well, hello there," Captain Chun said cheerfully. "This is quite a surprise. We don't get many visitors out here. I'm Captain Chun of the Lucky Explorer. What brings you folks all the way out to this little corner of nowhere?" Professor Kethvar exchanged glances with Dr. HFY Sci-Fi. The human captain's casual demeanor was exactly what their behavioral profiles had predicted, but experiencing it firsthand was still somewhat unsettling. Most species approached first contact with other spacefaring civilizations with formal protocols and careful diplomatic language. "Captain Chun," Professor Kethvar replied formally. "I am Professor Kethvar of the Confederation Science Council. We are here to conduct observational studies of the unique xenobiological interactions your crew has reported." Captain Chen's expression brightened even further. "Oh, you mean Sparkles, Smokey, and Blob? Would you like to meet them? They're absolutely wonderful. Sparkles has been helping us with some crystallography work. Smokey's been fascinating to observe. Did you know shadow entities can actually photosynthesize in reverse? And Blob has been teaching us about multidimensional physics." The casual way the human described potentially lethal alien entities as if they were household companions sent a chill through Professor Kethvar's crystalline structure. According to all established protocols, what Captain Chun was describing should have been impossible. "Captain Dr. Sislek interjected. Are you aware that the entities you describe match the threat profiles of several species that have caused casualties among Confederation survey teams?" Captain Chen's expression shifted to one of genuine concern. Oh my. No, I wasn't aware of that. Are you sure we're talking about the same creatures? Sparkles, Smokey, and Blob have been nothing but helpful and friendly. Maybe you've encountered different species that just happen to be similar. Professor Kethvar was beginning to understand why the Confederation Science Council had been so concerned about this situation. Either the humans had encountered entirely different species that merely resembled known threats, or they had somehow managed to establish peaceful contact with entities that had killed numerous other beings. Perhaps, he said carefully, you could show us how you interact with these entities? We would very much like to understand your methods. Captain Shin grinned. Of course, I'd be happy to introduce you. Fair warning, though, Blob gets a bit excited around new people, and Smokey tends to be shy at first. Sparkles is usually pretty social, though. Would you like to come aboard, or should we arrange a meeting in neutral space? The casual invitation to board a vessel that was presumably contaminated with multiple lethal xenobiological threats left Professor Kethvar momentarily speechless. The humans seemed to have no understanding whatsoever of the dangers they were supposedly living alongside. We would prefer, he said slowly, to observe from a safe distance initially. Perhaps you could bring one of the entities to your main view screen so we can conduct preliminary observations. Sure thing, Captain Shin replied enthusiastically. Let me go get Sparkles. She's usually the most photogenic of the three. As the human captain disappeared from view, Professor Kethvar activated the ship's emergency containment protocols and had the shields reconfigured to maximum defensive settings. If they were about to observe direct human-alien interaction, he wanted to be prepared for any possible catastrophe. What they were about to witness would challenge everything the Galactic Confederation believed about xenobiological safety. Professor Kethvar watched in fascinated horror as Captain Chun returned to the view screen, carrying what appeared to be certain death in her bare hands. The crystalline entity designated Sparkles nestled against the human's chest like a beloved pet, its faceted surfaces pulsing with the exact same energy signatures that had killed the Xerian Prime survey team. This is Sparkles, Captain Chun announced cheerfully, gently scratching what appeared to be the creature's sensory ridge. She's been with us for about 2 weeks now. Haven't you, girl? The crystalline being emitted a harmonic resonance that the ship's sensors immediately identified as a technologically enhanced communication attempt. According to all established protocols, this sound should have triggered immediate quarantine procedures and emergency containment activation. Instead, Captain Shin smiled and made soft cooing sound in response, as if she were communicating with a domestic animal. She says hello. Sparkles is actually quite chatty once you get to know her communication patterns. Dr. Kitch's mandibles clicked frantically as she reviewed the sensor data streaming across her console. Professor, she whispered urgently, the nanoscale integration patterns are definitely active. I'm detecting technological contamination signatures throughout the human's nervous system. Yet Captain Shun showed no signs of the neural degradation that should have accompanied such contamination. Her behavior remained typically human, warm, social, and completely oblivious to the danger she was apparently in. Captain Shun, Professor Kethvar, said carefully, how long have you been in direct physical contact with Sparkles? Oh, since the day we found her, Captain Shun replied, shifting the crystalline entity to a more comfortable position. She was actually stuck in a cave formation on the planet's surface. Poor thing seemed lonely and confused. It took us 3 days to carefully extract her without damaging the surrounding crystal matrix. The casual way the human described manually extracting a potentially lethal alien entity from its natural habitat made Professor Kethvar's exoskeleton shift to a deep orange color, a zenthery expression of extreme anxiety. And you experienced no adverse effect from this contact? Dr. Teachwesislek asked, her voice tight with disbelief. Captain Shun tilted her head thoughtfully. Well, I did have some strange dreams for the first few nights. Lots of geometric patterns and mathematical sequences. But then Sparkles and I started to understand each other better, and the dreams became quite peaceful, actually. Professor Kethvar felt his academic understanding of xenobiological safety crumbling. The strange dreams Captain Shun described were textbook symptoms of nanoscale neural integration, the same process that had turned Zekthar into a mindless drone. Yet somehow, instead of losing her humanity, Captain Shin seemed to have established a stable symbiotic relationship with the technological contamination. "Captain," he said slowly, "would it be possible for us to scan you with our medical sensors? We're curious about the physiological effects of prolonged contact with crystalline entities." "Of course," Captain Chun agreed readily. "Though I should warn you, Dr. Martinez says I'm in the best health I've been in years. Sparkle seems to have optimized my vitamin absorption and improved my neural processing speed. I can solve complex mathematical equations in my head now." The cheerful way she described what should have been the preliminary stages of consciousness absorption left the Confederation observers speechless. Either humans possessed some unprecedented resistance to technological contamination, or the crystalline entity was somehow enhancing Captain Chin's biology rather than replacing it. "Perhaps," Dr. HFY Sci-Fi suggested hesitantly, "we could also meet Smokey." Captain Chin's face lit up. "Oh, you'll love Smokey. He's a bit camera shy, but he's incredibly gentle. Just give me a moment to coax him over here." The human disappeared from view again, and Professor Kethvar took the opportunity to review the medical scan data they had collected. The results were disturbing in ways he hadn't expected. Captain Chun was indeed contaminated with nanoscale technological structures, the same type that had proven lethal to dozens of Confederation explorers. However, instead of replicating uncontrollably and converting her biological systems to technological analogs, the structures seemed to be working in harmony with her natural physiology. Her brain activity showed enhanced pattern recognition and mathematical processing, but her personality and core consciousness remained distinctly human. "This is unprecedented," Dr. HFY Sci-Fi murmured, reviewing the same data. "The technological integration is actually improving her biological function rather than replacing it. It's as if the nanoscale structures are adapting to work with human physiology instead of overriding it." Before Professor Kethvar could respond, Captain Chin returned to the view screen with what appeared to be a living shadow draped across her shoulders like a peculiar scarf. The entity's form seemed to absorb light, creating distortions in the visual field that made it difficult to focus on directly. "This is Smokey," Captain Chin announced, gently stroking what might have been the creature's head region. "He's a bit of an introvert, but he's absolutely fascinating to talk with. Did you know that shadow entities experience time differently than we do? Smokey perceives events in multiple temporal dimensions simultaneously." The ship's psychic threat detectors immediately began blaring warnings. The shadow entity was broadcasting mental emanations at levels that should have overwhelmed any unshielded consciousness within a 50-meter radius. Yet Captain Chun continued to interact with it, as if it were a beloved household pet. "Captain," Professor Kethvar said urgently, "are you receiving any telepathic communication from that entity?" "Oh, yes," Captain Chun replied enthusiastically. "Smokey's been teaching me about his people's philosophy. They see existence as a spectrum rather than discrete states of being. It's quite beautiful, really. They believe that consciousness is just another form of energy that can be shared and enhanced rather than diminished." The casual way she described what sounded like the preliminary stages of psychic assimilation made Professor Kethvar want to activate every emergency protocol simultaneously. Yet Captain Chin showed no signs of losing her individual identity to the shadow entity's influence. "The psychic contamination readings are off the charts," Dr. HFY Sci-Fi reported quietly, "but somehow the human's consciousness remains stable and distinctly separate from the entity. It's as if they're communicating rather than being absorbed." Professor Kethvar was beginning to suspect that humans possessed some unknown ability that allowed them to establish genuine communication with species that other races could only perceive as threats. The implications were staggering. "Captain Chun," he said carefully, You mentioned a third entity. Could we perhaps meet? Blob. Captain Chin's expression became slightly apologetic. Oh, Blob is napping right now. He gets tired after big meals. Yesterday, we fed him some of the dark matter we collected from a nearby nebula, and he's been sleeping it off ever since. He's grown about 30% in the last week. The casual mention of feeding exotic matter to an unknown alien entity made Professor Kethvar's academic composure finally crack. Captain, you're feeding dark matter to an uncontained alien life form? Well, not exactly dark matter, Captain Chin corrected. It's more like matter that exists in multiple dimensional phases simultaneously. Blob needs it for his metabolism. Regular food just passes right through him since he's not entirely present in our dimensional space. Dr. HFY was frantically cross-referencing the description with known threat databases. Professor, she whispered urgently, this matches the reports from the Dimensional Research Station Omega. The expedition that encountered similar entities lost 3 ships to what they described as reality hemorrhaging. Yet here was Captain Chun, describing feeding such an entity as if it were a routine pet care activity. Either humans were catastrophically naive about the dangers they were courting, or they possessed some innate ability to safely interact with threats that were lethal to other species. Captain, Professor Kethvar said slowly, how did you determine what these entities needed for sustenance? Did you conduct metabolic analysis, energy requirement studies, or dimensional compatibility tests? Captain Chin looked puzzled by the question. Oh, nothing that formal. We just tried different things until we found what worked. Sparkles seemed to like the mineral formations from the planet's crust. Smokey enjoyed absorbing light from our ship's energy cores. And Blob kept trying to eat our sensor equipment until we realized he needed exotic matter. The idea that humans had successfully met the needs of 3 potentially lethal alien entities through trial and error rather than scientific analysis was both impressive and terrifying. By all logic, such an approach should have resulted in multiple fatalities and possibly the destruction of their entire ship. You determined their needs through experimentation? Dr. HFY asked, her translator struggling with the concept. More like intuition, really, Captain Chin replied thoughtfully. You spend enough time with someone or something, and you start to understand what makes them happy or uncomfortable. Sparkles gets excited around certain mineral formations. Smokey becomes more active during our ship's night cycle. Blob gets restless if he goes too long without dimensional variety in his diet. Professor Kethvar realized he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. Humans seemed to possess an intuitive understanding of alien psychology that allowed them to establish genuine relationships with species that other races could only perceive as existential threats. Captain Chun, he said carefully, would you be willing to allow a small delegation from our ship to visit yours? We would very much like to observe these interactions more directly. Captain Chin's face brightened. Of course, I'd love to introduce you to everyone properly. Though I should warn you, Blob gets really excited around new people, and his excitement can cause some dimensional fluctuations. Nothing dangerous, but electronics sometimes glitch a bit. The casual warning about dimensional fluctuations caused by an alien entity's emotional state made Professor Kethvar question everything he thought he knew about xenobiological safety. Yet the humans seemed to have not only survived such phenomena, but adapted to living with them as routine inconveniences. Perhaps, he suggested, we could start with a very small delegation. Dr. HFY and myself, with full containment equipment and emergency extraction protocols. Bring whatever makes you comfortable, Captain Chun agreed cheerfully. Though you might want to leave the containment fields behind. They make Sparkles nervous, and when she gets anxious, her harmonic resonance can interfere with most artificial force field generators. As they arranged the details of the meeting, Professor Kethvar found himself preparing for what might be the most dangerous or most enlightening encounter of his career. Everything the humans described should have been impossible according to established xenobiological safety protocols. Yet the evidence suggested that humans had somehow managed to establish peaceful, mutually beneficial relationships with 3 different species that would have been immediately classified as existential threats by any Confederation survey team. Either humans possessed some unknown evolutionary advantage that made them uniquely suited for such interactions, or the galaxy contained far more benevolent life forms than the Confederation had ever realized. The implications of either possibility would fundamentally alter their understanding of xenobiological safety. As Professor Kethvar prepared to board a ship that was supposedly contaminated with multiple lethal alien entities, he couldn't help but wonder if he was about to witness the dawn of a new era in galactic relations, or document the most spectacular xenobiological disaster in recorded history. The airlock hissed shut behind Professor Kethvar and Dr. Tichwasis as they stepped aboard the human vessel Lucky Explorer. Both scientists wore full environmental suits despite Captain Chen's assurances that the atmosphere was safe. After decades of studying xenobiological disasters, neither was prepared to trust their lives to human intuition about alien safety. "Welcome aboard." Captain Chun greeted them warmly, her casual clothing and relaxed demeanor a stark contrast to the formal environmental suits of her visitors. "I hope you don't mind the informal atmosphere. We've learned that our friends respond better to a relaxed environment than military precision." Professor Kethvar's sensors immediately began detecting the energy signatures they had observed from a distance. The crystalline entity's technological emanations were stronger here, permeating the ship's atmosphere with nanoscale structures that should have triggered immediate quarantine protocols. Yet the human crew moved about their duties with casual efficiency, apparently unaffected by contamination that should have been lethal. "Captain Chun," Dr. Tichwasis said carefully, her mandibles clicking nervously behind her suit's faceplate, "our sensors are detecting significant technological contamination throughout your ship. Are you certain your crew hasn't experienced any adverse effects?" Captain Chen's expression grew thoughtful. "Well, there have been some changes since Sparkles came aboard. Our computer systems are running about 30% more efficiently, and we've been able to solve some long-standing technical problems with our navigation array." Dr. Martinez says the crew's cognitive test scores have improved across the board. The casual way she described what should have been the early stages of technological assimilation made Professor Kethvar's crystalline structure shift to a concerned amber hue. "Captain, enhanced cognitive function is often the first symptom of nanoscale neural integration. In documented cases, this enhancement is followed by complete loss of individual consciousness." Captain Chen mused, "That doesn't sound like what we're experiencing at all. Everyone's still very much themselves, just sharper, I guess, like having access to a better tool set for thinking with." Before either scientist could respond, a soft harmonic resonance filled the corridor. Professor Kethvar's threat detection systems immediately activated, identifying the sound as a technological communication attempt from a Class 6 hazardous entity. "Oh, that's Sparkles," Captain Chen said cheerfully. "She must have heard new voices. She loves meeting people." The crystalline entity appeared around the corner, moving with fluid grace that seemed to ignore the usual constraints of solid matter physics. Its faceted surface caught the ship's lighting and threw prismatic patterns across the walls as it approached the group. Professor Kethvar instinctively stepped backward, every protocol he had ever learned screaming warnings about maintaining distance from uncontained technological entities. Dr. Tichwasis' carapace began secreting defensive pheromones that her suit's recycling system quickly neutralized. "Easy there, girl," Captain Chun said gently as the entity approached. "These are our new friends. They want to learn about you." To the scientist's amazement, the crystalline being actually slowed its approach in response to the human's words. It emitted a different harmonic pattern, one that Professor Kethvar's analyzers interpreted as curious rather than aggressive. "She's asking if you're friendly," Captain Chun translated casually. "Sparkles can sense emotional states through bioelectromagnetic resonance. She knows you're nervous, The idea that a technological entity was demonstrating emotional intelligence and social awareness contradicted everything Professor Kethvar understood about such beings. Technological contamination was supposed to be a mindless process of replication and conversion, not a basis for interpersonal communication. How do you know what she's saying? Dr. HFY Sci-Fi asked, her scientific curiosity overriding her caution. Practice, mostly, Captain Chen replied. The first few days were confusing, but once you learn to recognize the different harmonic patterns, it becomes pretty clear. Sparkles has a vocabulary of about 200 distinct resonances so far, and she's learning new ones every day. The crystalline entity moved closer, apparently encouraged by the conversation. Professor Kethvar watched in fascination and terror as it extended what might have been a sensory appendage toward his environmental suit. His threat detection systems were practically screaming warnings about imminent contamination. She wants to shake hands, Captain Chen explained. It's okay if you're not comfortable with that. Sparkles understands that different species have different comfort levels with physical contact. The casual way the humans spoke of the entity's understanding of interspecies etiquette suggested a level of social sophistication that should have been impossible for a technological life form. Yet the entity's behavior seemed to confirm Captain Chen's interpretation. It waited patiently, not forcing contact, but clearly hoping for some form of acknowledgement. Dr. HFY Sci-Fi surprised everyone, including herself, by slowly extending one of her suited appendages toward the crystalline being. For science, she murmured, though her voice carried traces of genuine curiosity rather than mere academic obligation. The moment of contact was anticlimactic. No alarms sounded, no contamination warnings triggered, no technological integration began. The entity simply touched Dr. Kleslek's glove gently, emitted a pleased harmonic, and withdrew. She likes you, Captain Chen announced with a smile. Sparkle says you have interesting resonance patterns in your carapace structure. Dr. HFY Sci-Fi stared at her glove where the contact had occurred. According to every protocol she knew, she should now be experiencing the beginning stages of technological contamination. Instead, she felt nothing. No symptoms, no changes, no loss of consciousness or individuality. This is impossible, she whispered. That's what we thought at first, too. Captain Chen agreed. But once you stop thinking about it as contamination and start thinking about it as communication, everything makes much more sense. Before anyone could respond to this statement, a new presence made itself known. The corridor seemed to dim slightly as shadows began moving in ways that defied the laws of physics. Professor Kethvar's psychic threat detectors activated, warning of class, 8 mental contamination signatures approaching. And here's Smokey, Captain Chen said warmly as the shadow entity materialized from what had appeared to be empty air. He's been napping in the cargo bay, but I think he sensed we had visitors. The shadow being moved like liquid darkness, flowing along the walls and sealing in patterns that hurt to follow directly. Professor Kethvar felt an immediate pressure against his consciousness, the familiar sensation of psychic intrusion that he had trained extensively to resist. Yet something was different about this intrusion. Instead of the brutal, overwhelming assault he expected from a Class 8 psychic entity, the contact felt more like a polite inquiry, as if something was asking permission before entering his mind. Smokey's saying hello, Captain Chen translated. He's curious about how different species experience consciousness. He finds the variety fascinating rather than threatening. The idea that a psychic entity might be genuinely interested in other forms of consciousness rather than seeking to dominate or absorb them was revolutionary. Professor Kethvar had studied dozens of cases involving psychic contamination, and all had involved entities that sought to expand themselves at the expense of other minds. Can you understand what he's thinking? Dr. HFY Sci-Fi asked, her scientific instruments detecting psychic emanations that should have been impossible to interpret safely. Not exactly thinking, Captain Chen replied thoughtfully. It's more like feeling what he feels, seeing patterns the way he sees them. Smokey experiences time as a multidimensional space where past, present, and future exist simultaneously. It's beautiful, but incredibly complex. As if responding to the conversation, the shadow entity extended what might have been a sensory appendage toward Professor Kethvar. Unlike the crystalline being's direct approach, this contact felt like a question being asked directly in his mind. Despite every protocol screaming warnings, Professor Kethvar found himself nodding consent. The psychic contact, when it came, was nothing like the brutal assaults he had studied. Instead, he experienced a brief moment of expanded perception, a glimpse of reality as perceived by a being that existed partially outside linear time. The sensation lasted only seconds, but in that brief contact, Professor Kethvar understood something profound. The shadow entity wasn't trying to absorb his consciousness or override his individuality. It was simply sharing its perspective, offering a glimpse of how it experienced existence. "Remarkable," he whispered as the contact ended. "I felt no aggression, no desire to dominate. It was almost educational. Smokey's people are philosophers," Captain Shin explained. "They're fascinated by different forms of consciousness and different ways of experiencing reality. That's why he was drawn to our ship in the first place. He'd never encounter minds that process information the way humans do." Dr. HFY Sci-Fi was frantically recording everything on her instruments, trying to document what appeared to be the first recorded case of beneficial psychic contact with an unknown entity. "This contradicts everything we know about psychic contamination," she murmured. "Maybe the problem isn't contamination," Captain Shin suggested. "Maybe the problem is assuming that different automatically means dangerous." Before anyone could respond to this observation, the corridor began to shimmer slightly, as if reality itself was becoming unstable. Professor Kethvar's dimensional scanners immediately activated, detecting massive fluctuations in local spacetime. "Oh, that means Blob is waking up," Captain Shin said cheerfully. "He always causes a bit of dimensional flutter when he shifts between sleep and wake states. Don't worry, it's harmless." The casual way she dismissed what appeared to be localized reality distortion made Professor Kethvar question his sanity. Dimensional instabilities were among the most dangerous phenomena known to science, capable of tearing holes in spacetime itself. Yet as they watched, the fluctuations stabilized into a gentle rippling effect that seemed almost playful. The entity that emerged from what had appeared to be solid wall defied easy description. It seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, sometimes solid, sometimes gaseous, sometimes something that had no name in conventional physics. "This is Blob," Captain Chun announced fondly. "He's still a bit sleepy, so he might be more translucent than usual." The multidimensional entity approached with what could only be described as curiosity, its form shifting through various states of matter as it moved. Professor Kethvar's sensors detected energy signatures that should have indicated imminent dimensional collapse. Instead, the entity seemed to be stabilizing local space-time through its presence, as if its natural ability to exist in multiple dimensions allowed it to smooth out the rough edges where different realities intersected. Blob's people exist throughout multiple dimensional phases simultaneously, Captain Shun explained as the entity settled into a roughly humanoid shape. They experience reality as a continuous spectrum rather than discrete states. They're incredibly good at fixing dimensional instabilities because they can perceive and manipulate the underlying structure directly. As if to demonstrate, the entity extended what might have been an appendage toward a section of wall where Professor Kethvar's instruments detected a minor dimensional weak point. With a gentle touch that seemed to exist in several dimensions at once, the entity stabilized the fluctuation, leaving the local space-time more stable than it had been before. "He's been helping us repair some damage our ship sustained in a dimensional storm last month," Captain Shin continued. "Our engineering team couldn't even detect the problem, but Blob fixed it in about 10 minutes. The implications of what Professor Kethvar was witnessing were staggering. Instead of threatening entities that posed existential dangers to known life, the humans seemed to have encountered beings that were actively beneficial. The crystalline entity enhanced cognitive function, the shadow being offered expanded consciousness, and the multidimensional entity could repair fundamental problems with reality itself. Either humans possessed some unprecedented ability to recognize and communicate with beneficial alien life forms, or they had encountered the three most unusually helpful entities in galactic history. Captain Chun, Professor Kethvar said slowly, "How did you know these entities were safe to interact with?" Captain Chun looked puzzled by the question. "Well, they seemed friendly. None of them ever tried to hurt us or demanded anything we weren't willing to give. They were curious about us, and we were curious about them. It just worked out naturally." The simplicity of her answer was both enlightening and terrifying. While the Confederation had developed complex protocols based on the assumption that unknown entities were dangerous until proven otherwise, humans seemed to operate on the opposite assumption, that unknown entities were potential friends until proven otherwise. It was either the most naive or the most enlightened approach to xenobiological contact that Professor Kethvar had ever encountered. 6 months after Professor Kethvar's initial encounter with a human vessel Lucky Explorer, the Galactic Confederation convened its largest scientific symposium in recorded history. Representatives from every member species gathered aboard the massive research station, Universal Harmony, to discuss what had become known as the human phenomenon. The great amphitheater buzzed with excited conversation as delegates from 47 different species shared data, theories, and increasingly incredible reports. Professor Kethvar stood at the primary podium, his crystalline exoskeleton reflecting the nervous energy that filled the vast chamber. "Honored colleagues," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. "6 months ago, I delivered a lecture on the fundamental principles of xenobiological safety. Today, I must report that everything we thought we knew about interspecies contact may require complete reconsideration." The holographic display behind him activated, showing the Lucky Explorer alongside 6 other human vessels, each accompanied by what the humans called their alien friends. The sight would have triggered immediate evacuation protocols just months earlier. Now, it represented the most significant breakthrough in galactic diplomacy since the formation of the Confederation itself. What began as an isolated incident has become a pattern of unprecedented success, Professor Kethvar continued. In the past 6 months, human vessels have made beneficial contact with 37 different alien species, including 12 that were previously classified as existential threats to Confederation worlds. Dr. HFY Sci-Fi activated her section of the display, showing detailed biological scans and interaction data. "Our analysis of human physiology has revealed several unique characteristics that may explain their success. Human neural architecture demonstrates unusual adaptability, allowing for beneficial symbiosis with technological contamination rather than simple absorption. The data streams showed brain scans from human crew members who had worked with crystalline entities similar to sparkles. Instead of the neural degradation observed in other species, the humans showed enhanced cognitive function while maintaining their individual personalities and decision-making autonomy. Furthermore, Dr. HFY continued, human consciousness appears to operate on multiple levels simultaneously, allowing for psychic contact that enhances rather than replaces their existing mental patterns. They can communicate with entities like Smokey without losing their essential humanity." Admiral Alexandra rose from her position at the Central Council table, her silvery Vorthan features reflecting the aurora-like patterns that indicated deep thought. "Dr. HFY Sci-Fi, are you suggesting that humans are naturally immune to the contamination effects we have observed in other species?" "Not immune," Dr. HFY Sci-Fi corrected. "Rather, they seem capable of forming true symbiotic relationships with contamination sources. Where other species experience replacement or absorption, humans achieve integration that benefits both parties." Professor Voltanus, the elderly Zenthri xenopsychologist, activated his display section to show comparative behavioral analysis. Our psychological studies have revealed an equally significant factor. Humans demonstrate what they call optimistic first contact protocols. They approach unknown entities with curiosity and friendly intention rather than defensive caution. The hologram showed side-by-side footage of typical Confederation first contact procedures versus human approaches. The contrast was striking. While Confederation teams maintained careful distance and extensive protective barriers, humans walked directly up to unknown entities and attempted immediate communication. This approach should result in catastrophic casualties, Professor Veltanus continued. Yet humans have achieved a 94% success rate in establishing beneficial relationships with previously unknown alien life forms. A young Klaxi researcher clicked nervously before asking, "What about the remaining 6%? Surely some encounters must have resulted in casualties." Captain Chun, who had been invited as a special guest speaker, stood to address the question. In the months since first contact with the Confederation, she had become something of a celebrity among xenobiological researchers. Her casual approach to interspecies relations had revolutionized thinking across multiple academic disciplines. "We've had a few encounters that didn't work out," she admitted cheerfully. The crystalline hive mind on Kepler 438b wasn't interested in individual communication. They prefer to work with larger groups. The energy beings near the Vega Nebula were fascinating, but too large for meaningful interaction. And the time-shifted entities around Proxima Centauri exist at a temporal frequency that makes communication impossible. But no fatalities? Dr. HFY Sci-Fi pressed. Captain Shin shook her head. "No, nothing like that. When someone isn't interested in being friends, they usually make it pretty clear. We just say, 'Thanks for your time,' and move on. No harm, no foul." The simplicity of her explanation sent ripples of amazement through the audience. The human's ability to recognize when contact was unwelcome and withdraw gracefully had prevented the kinds of catastrophic encounters that had led to so many Confederation casualties. Dr. Korthmix, the pragmatic Duralian, activated his display to show economic and strategic analysis. The practical implications of human capabilities extend far beyond academic interest. Planets that were previously classified as uninhabitable due to hostile alien presence are now potential colony sites. Resources that were inaccessible due to protective alien entities can now be obtained through cooperative agreements. The economic data was staggering. Human negotiated agreements with alien entities had already resulted in access to rare minerals, advanced technologies, and even assistance with terraforming projects. What had once been seen as obstacles to galactic expansion were now viewed as potential partners in development. More significantly, Dr. Korthmix continued, humans have established what appears to be the first truly universal translation protocol. Their friendship approach seems to transcend species barriers, allowing for communication with entities that have resisted all previous contact attempts. The implications were revolutionary. For centuries, the Confederation had operated under the assumption that truly alien life forms were fundamentally incompatible with known civilization. Humans had proven that assumption false through the simple expedient of treating unknown entities as potential friends rather than inevitable threats. Professor Kethvar activated the final section of the presentation, showing current research initiatives. Based on human success rates, we are implementing new first contact protocols across all Confederation survey teams. Human advisors will accompany future expeditions to provide guidance on friendship-based contact methods. The display showed training programs where human diplomats taught other species how to approach unknown entities with curiosity rather than caution, how to recognize friendly versus hostile intent, and how to withdraw gracefully when contact was unwelcome. Initial results from these joint missions show promising outcomes, Professor Kethvar continued. While non-human species do not demonstrate the same natural immunity to contamination effects, human-guided approaches have reduced hostile encounters by 87%. A Vorthan delegate raised an elegant appendage. Professor Kethvar, do we have any explanation for why humans possess these unusual capabilities? Are they the result of evolutionary pressures unique to their homeworld? Professor Kethvar's exoskeleton shifted to a thoughtful blue-green hue. Our analysis of Earth's biological history provides some intriguing clues. Humans evolved alongside an unusually diverse array of species, many of which demonstrated complex intelligence despite radically different physiological structures. The display showed footage from Earth, including humans interacting with dolphins, elephants, corvids, and other intelligent terrestrial species. The patterns of communication and cooperation were remarkably similar to what humans demonstrated with alien entities. Additionally, Professor Kethvar continued, humans have a documented history of forming beneficial relationships with other Earth species through domestication. They refer to this as keeping pets, a practice that involves caring for other species without expectation of utilitarian return. Dr. HFY Sci-Fi added supporting data. Analysis of human-pet relationships shows the same neural and psychological patterns we observe in their interactions with alien entities. Humans appear to be naturally predisposed to form emotional bonds with non-human intelligence, regardless of how exotic that intelligence might be. Captain Chin nodded enthusiastically. That's exactly right. When we first met Sparkles, Smokey, and Blob, it felt completely natural to treat them like new friends who just happen to be really different from us. The same way you'd approach a neighbor's unusual pet. The casual way she compared potentially lethal alien entities to household pets demonstrated the fundamental difference in human psychology that made their success possible. Where other species saw threats to be avoided or contained, humans saw individuals to be understood and befriended. Admiral Jensen stood to address the full assembly. This symposium represents a watershed moment in galactic civilization. The human approach to xenobiological contact has opened possibilities that we never imagined. Planets we thought were lost to us are now potential homes. Entities we feared are now potential allies. The Admiral paused, allowing her words to sink in before continuing. However, we must also acknowledge that human capabilities appear to be unique among known species. While we can learn from their methods and achieve better outcomes, we cannot simply replicate their natural immunity to contamination effects. Professor Kethvar nodded in agreement. This is why the new protocols emphasize human-guided missions rather than attempting to train other species to operate independently using human methods. Humans appear to be naturally suited for the role of universal translators and diplomatic intermediaries. As the symposium continued, delegates shared reports from across the galaxy. Human teams had established communication with the living gas clouds of the Horsehead Nebula, negotiated mining rights with the silicon-based collectives of the asteroid belt, and even managed to calm the aggressive plant networks of the previously forbidden garden worlds. Each success story reinforced the same pattern. Humans approached unknown entities with curiosity and friendship rather than caution and fear, and this approach consistently produced positive outcomes. Where other species had seen only dangers to be avoided, humans had found a galaxy full of potential friends. The final presentation came from an unexpected source. Through quantum communication links, Sparkles herself addressed the assembly. Her harmonic resonances translated into multiple languages simultaneously. Human friends bring new songs to crystal people, her message conveyed. Before humans, crystal people sang alone in dark caves. Now, crystal people sing with warm friends who share light and laughter. Galaxy becomes more beautiful when different songs harmonize together. The crystalline entity's poetic description of interspecies friendship moved many delegates to what their respective cultures considered expressions of joy or approval. The idea that alien entities were not just tolerable, but actively beneficial to work with represented a complete paradigm shift in galactic thinking. As the symposium concluded, Professor Kethvar found himself revising the lecture he had given just 6 months earlier. Instead of warning students about the dangers of unknown species, he would now be teaching them how humans had transformed those dangers into opportunities for friendship and cooperation. The galaxy was vast and filled with wonders beyond imagination. Humans had proven that approaching those wonders with curiosity and friendship rather than fear and caution opened possibilities that no one had dared to dream. In the end, the most important lesson wasn't about advanced containment protocols or sophisticated threat assessment procedures. It was about the simple but profound power of assuming that different doesn't necessarily mean dangerous, and that the universe might be filled with friends waiting to be discovered rather than threats waiting to be avoided. Professor Kethvar's new lecture would be titled, Xenobiology Lesson: Why Humans Keep the Galaxy's Most Dangerous Species as Pets, and How We Can Learn from Their Success. It would be the most popular course offering in Confederation academic history.